What if the woman you stood up for on a plane turned out to own the entire airline? And what if she disappeared before you ever learned the truth? This is the story of a struggling single dad, a man who gave up his first-class seat without knowing he was about to change both of their lives forever. A story about kindness, flight, healing, and the kind of love that rises above everything. If stories like this speak to your heart, stories full of second chances, quiet heroes, and unexpected miracles, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell so you won't miss what comes next. Now, let's begin. Struggling single dad defended a woman kicked out of first class. She secretly owned the airline. The flight from Denver to Charlotte wasn't supposed to mean anything. For Ethan Blake, it was simply a bridge, a necessary step toward the life he was trying to rebuild. Clutching a faded duffel bag in one hand and holding his daughter Lucy's hand with the other, he stepped into the crowded terminal at Gate 29, praying for a smooth trip. Lucy, 7 and full of quiet wonder, looked up at the massive window overlooking the tarmac. "Daddy, are we flying that one?" Ethan squinted through the glass. The jet she pointed at gleamed silver under the late morning sun, the Dawson Air logo shining like a polished emblem of dreams he could no longer afford. "No, honey, ours is the smaller one next to it. Still flies just fine." She nodded solemnly, satisfied with the answer, and skipped beside him as they boarded. Ethan wasn't used to flying coach. Before the accident, before losing Callie, he had flown for the Air Force, and once briefly for commercial carriers. But that felt like another man's life now. These days, his boots were worn, his resume dusty, and his hands calloused from working nights at a garage that barely kept food on the table. He found their seats, 27B and 27C, sandwiched between a snoring teenager and a woman already buried in her laptop. He hoisted the bag into the overhead bin, helped Lucy into the window seat, and sat down with a sigh. Across the aisle, something strange was happening. A woman in a plain blue cardigan, travel-worn jeans, and a canvas shoulder bag was being ushered out of first class. She stood awkwardly, her cheeks flushed, while the flight attendant's voice, sharp enough to cut glass, carried clearly. "I'm sorry, miss, but this section is for first-class passengers only. You must have misread your ticket." The woman opened her mouth, hesitated, then closed it again. Her dignity crumpled slightly in the curve of her shoulders. She looked around as if to shrink. I was assigned this seat," she said quietly. The attendant didn't even check. "I'm sure it was a mistake. Please return to economy." The woman glanced toward the empty first-class seat, 3A, and then back to the long line of passengers watching. No one moved. No one spoke. Ethan felt it in his gut, that sour twist of unfairness. Maybe it was the way her voice trembled, or the way she didn't fight back. Maybe it was how much she reminded him of someone who'd been taught that standing up only gets you knocked down harder. Without thinking, Ethan stood up. "Excuse me," he called out, drawing startled glances. "I'll switch with her. You can put me in economy." The attendant blinked, thrown off balance. "Sir, that's not necessary." "Maybe not," he said evenly, "but it's the decent thing to do." The woman looked at him, startled. Her eyes, though a calm shade of stormy blue, locked with his for a beat too long. Then she smiled faintly. "You don't have to do that." "I want to," he said simply. The attendant sputtered something about protocol, but a supervising steward, who'd been watching from the galley, nodded discreetly. "Let it be, Karen." Ethan gathered his bag again. Lucy tugged at his sleeve, confused. "Daddy?" "It's okay, kiddo. We're just switching seats with someone who needs a little kindness today." Lucy nodded, trusting him with the ease only a child could. The woman slid into the seat beside Lucy, her hands still slightly trembling. "Thank you," she whispered to Ethan as he stepped into the aisle. "You didn't have to get involved." "Neither did they," Ethan murmured. "But they did." He found his new seat back in row 31, last row, beside the bathrooms. The hum of the engine masked his thoughts. He wasn't angry exactly, just tired of watching people pretend not to see what was right in front of them. Up front, Rachel Dawson exhaled slowly. She hadn't planned to sit in first class. The ticket had been assigned by the assistant she insisted on leaving behind for this trip. Her first in years without layers of staff, makeup, or security. She wanted to disappear into normalcy, to blend in and observe her own airline as a stranger might. But she hadn't expected that kind of welcome. What shook her most wasn't the attendant's dismissal. That was expected in a way. She had dressed down deliberately, concealing the gloss and privilege of a billion-dollar legacy beneath thrift store jeans and a borrowed backpack. No, what shook her was him, the man, the dad. His gesture wasn't loud or heroic. It was quiet, unapologetically kind. And in a world where kindness often came with a cost, it caught her completely off guard. Beside her, Lucy grinned. "Hi, I'm Lucy. That's my daddy. You can call him Ethan." Rachel smiled gently. "Hi, Lucy. I'm Rachel." "Are you sad?" Lucy asked, like only a child would. Rachel blinked. "Why would you ask that?" "You looked like you were going to cry before," Lucy said. "Daddy says it's okay to cry if someone hurts your heart." Rachel stared out the window, the girl's words settling in her chest like seeds. "Your daddy sounds like a very smart man." Lucy nodded proudly. "He is, but he doesn't think so." Rachel smiled again, softer this time. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like a passenger. She felt seen. And as the engines roared to life and the plane lifted into the sky, something inside Rachel shifted, like the first crack of light breaking through a sealed window. The seat in row 31 was narrower than Ethan remembered. Or maybe he was just older, taller, tired. Either way, the armrest dug into his ribs and the bathroom door beside him hissed every time someone flushed. He adjusted his shoulders, settled his bag underfoot, and glanced up the aisle. From this angle, he could just see the edge of seat 3A, and the woman now occupying it, Rachel. He didn't know her name yet, but her posture said more than a name could. Upright, hands folded neatly in her lap, chin tilted ever so slightly toward the window, as if watching clouds pass below could protect her from the stares still lingering, or the shame that settled long after the moment had passed. He'd seen that look before, on soldiers, on widows, on himself. The pilot came on with a voice too chipper for the hour, and the plane lurched forward. A toddler cried somewhere in row 9. A businessman sighed theatrically over a laptop that wouldn't connect to Wi-Fi. Life resumed its usual self-absorption. Ethan closed his eyes and let the noise wash over him like static. Up in first class, Rachel sat frozen in the pocket of silence between takeoff and altitude. She hadn't expected the kindness, and certainly not from a stranger. Her world, one of glass towers and closed-door meetings, was built on skepticism, contracts, clauses. Her life had trained her to look for motives behind every gesture, every handshake. But this man, this Ethan, had offered kindness with no agenda, no recognition, no transaction. He didn't know she was Rachel Dawson, the woman whose last name flew over 30 cities, the daughter of aviation royalty, the invisible CEO of Dawson Air, hiding in plain sight. And yet, he'd done something people in her inner circle hadn't done in years. He'd seen a human being, not a liability, not a mistake, not a headline. She stared down at the safety card tucked into the seat pocket. Her reflection in the glossed plastic looked pale, almost unfamiliar. Then a soft voice stirred beside her. "I think my dad likes you." Rachel turned, surprised. Lucy had somehow wriggled halfway out of her seatbelt and now leaned closer, whispering conspiratorially. "Oh?" Rachel managed. "Yeah, he never talks to people on planes." She nodded solemnly. "But you made him stand up. That means something." Rachel stifled a laugh. "You're very wise for someone under 4 feet tall." "I'm 7, Lucy corrected. "But I read big books." Rachel smiled. "What kinds of big books?" "Ones with dragons, and dads who save the world." Rachel's gaze softened. "Your dad sounds like a good one." "He is," Lucy said confidently. "Even when he's sad. He just hides it." Rachel nodded slowly. "That's what brave people do sometimes." They sat in comfortable quiet for a while, the child resting her head on Rachel's arm as if they'd known each other longer than 20 minutes. Rachel allowed herself to breathe, to exist in the stillness, not as a CEO, not as a guarded heiress, just as a woman who'd been offered a seat, and maybe something more. When the plane landed in Charlotte, The wheels kissed the runway with a familiar bump. Passengers sprang to their feet, stretching like it had been a journey through time rather than space. Rachel remained seated. So did Lucy, her hand still tucked in Rachel's. Ethan made his way slowly up the aisle, bag slung over one shoulder, expression unreadable. When he reached their row, Lucy lit up. "Daddy!" She told me a story about a girl who flew a paper plane that reached the moon. "Is that right?" he said, his tone warm but cautious. Rachel stood, smoothing her sweater. "I improvised. She's a good listener." Their eyes met again. Up close, she saw more of him now, a faint scar above the brow, the weary wisdom behind his humor. And he saw her differently, too. Not just the woman he'd stood up for, but someone who now shared a bond with his daughter. "Thanks again," Rachel said quietly, "for earlier." Ethan nodded. "Didn't sit right with me, that's all." She paused, then reached into her bag and scribbled something on a boarding pass stub. "If you ever need a contact in aviation, I know a few people." He took it, surprised, but pocketed it with a simple, "Appreciate it." Rachel gently squeezed Lucy's hand one last time. "You take care of your dad, okay?" "I always do," Lucy said proudly. Ethan smiled, this time with the trace of something real. "Safe travels, Rachel. And you, Ethan." And then she was gone. Later that night, Rachel sat alone in a quiet room at a boutique hotel just outside downtown. No assistants, no calls, just the city lights flickering outside her window and a folded paper plane Lucy had given her, made from a napkin during the flight. On the back in crayon were the words, "Fly high, Miss Rachel." She stared at it, emotions colliding in her chest. A napkin, a scribbled note, a man who traded comfort for compassion, a child who trusted like it was her superpower. Rachel Dawson had boarded that plane hoping to observe her airline from the shadows. She hadn't expected to be seen. And now something in her wouldn't let her walk away. Not from Ethan, not from Lucy, and not from the feeling that, for the first time in years, she was exactly where she needed to be. The morning sun had barely climbed above the rooftops of Charlotte when Rachel stepped out of her hotel room and into a different version of herself. Gone was the woman who'd flown first class unnoticed. Today her hair was pinned loosely, and her wardrobe consisted of a gray field jacket and dark jeans. Unbranded, unassuming. She wore no makeup, no heels, no security. She didn't need them here. Rachel Dawson, daughter of Richard Dawson, the aviation magnate who built an empire from a single hangar in Tulsa, had long since learned how to disappear in plain sight. And today, that skill would serve her better than any title ever had. She checked the address scribbled on the boarding pass stub Ethan had returned to her the night before. He hadn't called her number, of course. Men like him didn't follow up with strangers who offered vague business connections. He was too grounded for that, too proud. But the information he had given, almost unintentionally, had been more than enough. She'd found the hangar. It was tucked behind a regional airport on the outskirts of town, a long-abandoned building once used for flight training and crop dusting repairs. The kind of place most people would write off as forgotten. But as she stood at the chain-link fence, watching the sunrise glint off a rust-streaked roof, Rachel saw something else. Potential. Character. A beginning. A deep engine hum broke the silence. A faded blue pickup truck bounced over the gravel path, its front fender held together by duct tape and faith. It rolled to a stop just beyond the gate. Ethan stepped out, toolbox in hand. Flannel sleeves rolled past his elbows. His face looked half in shadow, half carved by the early light. Rachel didn't move. He didn't recognize her at first. His brow furrowed slightly, trying to place the familiar. Then he said, "You're the paper plane lady." She smiled, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek. "That's one way to remember me." He leaned on the open truck door, studying her. "Didn't expect to see you again." "I didn't expect to come," she replied honestly. "But I woke up this morning and couldn't shake the feeling I'd regret it if I didn't." He tilted his head, skeptical but not unkind. "You flew all the way here just to say thanks again?" She hesitated. "Not exactly." He crossed his arms. Rachel exhaled. "I wasn't entirely honest with you. I work in aviation. I oversee a few regional initiatives, partnerships with private pilots, new programs for transitioning veterans, things like that." You run a startup? He asked. She nodded slowly. Something like that. Ethan eyed her warily. And you're here because I'm looking for someone who understands both sides of flying, not just the cockpit, but the people on the ground. Someone who's been there, who's lived through the highs and lows and still believes flight is worth fighting for. She met his gaze squarely. I'm looking for someone like you. Ethan blinked. The words felt too rehearsed to be casual, but too genuine to be manipulative. And her eyes, even behind the modest appearance, held that same quiet steel he'd noticed on the plane. The kind people only earn through hardship. I'm not sure I'm interested in whatever this is, he said cautiously. I'm just trying to keep the lights on here. This isn't exactly a pilot's dream. That's why I'm here, Rachel replied, because you're not trying to impress anyone. You're just doing the work. She stepped closer, holding out a small folder. Basic documents, sample proposal sheets, rough sketches of a joint flight program she'd been drafting for months, but never found the right person to lead. He took it reluctantly, flipping through. Flying Forward, he read aloud. It's a transitional flight training program for ex-military pilots and mechanics. We've been testing it on the West Coast. I want to expand east, but we need a base. Someone to help us tailor the training to local communities. I was hoping this hangar might work. Ethan looked up. You want this place to be your base? She smiled. It has history, and so do you. He closed the folder and handed it back. Look, Rachel, I appreciate whatever it is you're trying to do, but I've got bills, a daughter, and 1,000 reasons to say no. Rachel didn't argue. She just nodded. Then she pulled a crumpled paper napkin from her pocket, the one Lucy had drawn on. She held it out. I kept this, she said gently, because it reminded me that not everything worth doing has to start big. Sometimes it just has to start real. He took the napkin slowly, unfolding it again. Fly high, Miss Rachel, he chuckled under his breath. You drive a hard bargain. I drive an honest one. He hesitated. Then quietly, you'd really want someone like me running a piece of your program? I'd rather have someone like you than a dozen people with polished resumes and no soul, she said. Besides, you already gave me your best seat. I figured I'd return the favor. Ethan looked back at the hangar, then at her. And for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel like the man just trying to stay afloat. He felt like maybe, just maybe, he was about to fly again. The old hangar still smelled like engine oil and cedar dust. Its walls, stained with years of sun and stories, stood like tired shoulders. Every creak in the roof, every faded photograph pinned to the corkboard, every dented tool on the peg wall whispered memories of better days. And Ethan had learned to live among them like ghosts, quiet, present, constant. But this morning, something had shifted. Rachel stood in the open doorway, sleeves rolled, clipboard in hand, her expression a blend of optimism and unshakable calm. She didn't look like a corporate rep. She looked like someone who had nothing left to prove and everything left to give. Ethan stepped down from the maintenance ladder, wiping grease from his fingers. You're back, he said simply. Rachel held up a paper coffee tray with a small, sheepish smile. Peace offering. I figured good ideas go better with caffeine. He chuckled. A real sound this time. Not forced, not guarded. You might be right about that. She handed him a cup. Black, no sugar, just the way he liked it. He didn't ask how she knew. Maybe he didn't want to. They stood in companionable silence for a beat. Then Rachel gestured around the hangar. This place, it has bones, soul. It feels like it matters. It used to, Ethan said. My dad taught crop dusting flights out of here in the 80s. When he passed, I kept it going as long as I could. Then Callie got sick. I sold off most of the fleet. The rest, he looked at a sheet-draped plane in the corner. Just memories. Rachel didn't press. She let his words settle like dust in the sunlight. I don't want to take over your space, Ethan, she said gently. I want to give it back its wings. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You're a romantic for someone in corporate. She grinned. Guilty, I just hide it under spreadsheets. He laughed, then motioned toward a side workbench. Well, if you're planning to run a flight program out of here, you might as well see what you're up against. They walked together through the space, past old propellers mounted like trophies, rusted flight gauges, cracked leather seats from a trainer aircraft long decommissioned. Rachel ran her fingers lightly across a weathered wing, reverent. "Can I ask something?" she said, pausing by an open toolbox. "Sure, but why'd you stand up for me on that flight?" Ethan looked at her, really looked. "I've got a daughter," he said. "She watches everything I do, what I say, what I let happen, and someday someone's going to try to make her feel small, like you looked in that moment. I want her to remember that I didn't stay quiet." Rachel swallowed. The truth of it struck deep. "She's lucky," she murmured. "I'm the lucky one," he replied almost reflexively. "She's my reason for showing up, even on days I'd rather disappear." Rachel turned to face him fully. "I think you've been showing up for a lot more than just her." Their eyes held there for a moment too long, something silent passing between them, warm and hesitant. But then the sound of a small voice broke the spell. "Daddy!" Lucy barreled into the hangar like a streak of sunlight, her backpack bouncing. "Miss Rachel, you're here again." Rachel bent down, arms open. "Hey there, co-pilot." Ishram. Lucy hugged her tightly, then stepped back, inspecting the clipboard. "Are we building a spaceship?" "Not today," Rachel laughed. "But maybe we'll build something that can take you almost as far." Ethan tousled Lucy's hair. "What do you think, kiddo? Would you be okay with this place turning into a training school?" Lucy's eyes widened. "With real planes?" Ethan nodded. "Real ones. And Miss Rachel will stay?" Rachel looked at Ethan, then at Lucy. "If your dad says yes, I think I'll be around a while." Lucy clapped and ran to show her the corner where she kept a plastic model jet she'd built with Ethan's help. The two of them knelt down beside it, their laughter echoing softly against the tin roof. Ethan watched them, a woman who seemed both out of reach and deeply familiar, and a child who opened her heart with the simplicity of love that asked for nothing in return. For a long time, Ethan had lived in the quiet aftermath of grief. Mornings came, work was done, Lucy was cared for, but the idea of building anything new had felt foreign, almost selfish. Now watching Rachel trace her fingers along Lucy's carefully painted airplane, something stirred in him that felt suspiciously like hope. That evening, after Rachel had gone and the hangar was quiet again, Ethan sat at the workbench, flipping through the flying forward binder she'd left behind. He paused at a page titled Flight with Purpose, a training module designed for single parents returning to aviation careers. At the bottom in Rachel's handwriting was a note. "Some wings are made from more than metal and fuel. Some are built from memory, grit, and love." Ethan closed the folder and looked at the ceiling as the last of the sunlight bled through the high windows. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was fixing something broken. He felt like he was getting ready to fly. The following week unfolded like a scene Rachel hadn't dared to imagine in years. Each morning, she pulled up in her rental car to the faded gravel lot beside the hangar. And each morning, Ethan was already there. Sleeves rolled, grease under his nails, mind deep in some piece of machinery that most people would have called junk, but he still insisted on fixing. Lucy greeted her like family every single day. The hangar, once still and silent, now buzzed with a kind of quiet resurrection. Old propellers were dusted off, tools reorganized, blueprints unrolled. What had been a space for survival was slowly becoming a place for possibility. But beneath the warmth, Rachel carried a weight she hadn't yet put down. She wasn't lying, not exactly. Everything she'd told Ethan about flying forward was real. The training program existed. The expansion was underway. And she had chosen his hangar for more than sentimental reasons. What she hadn't told him, what she couldn't tell him, was that she didn't just oversee it. She owned it. She owned all of it. Dawson Air, flying forward, the regional infrastructure, the PR department that was already begging her for updates and photos of the veteran father-daughter mechanic story. If she gave the word, Ethan's name would be everywhere by morning, and he had no idea. That afternoon, as the late September sun leaned lazily against the hangar roof, Ethan wheeled out an old flight simulator chair from the back room. Rachel helped him wipe off the years of dust, while Lucy danced circles around them with a toy glider. "You rebuilt this thing?" Rachel asked, running her hand over the cracked leather. Mostly, Ethan said, adjusting a frayed cable. Callie and I used to train crop dusters on this before we switched over to actual test flights. Rachel hesitated. You don't talk about her much. He paused, then sat on the edge of the chair, hands resting on his knees. She was fire, he said quietly. Smart, funny, stubborn as hell. Loved the sky more than I did, if that's possible. We got married at 21. Bought our first junked-up Cessna before we had a mattress. Rachel sat on the floor across from him. The air between them shifted, gentler now. She got sick, he continued. Ovarian cancer. We fought for 2 years. She made me promise I'd keep Lucy flying, no matter what. Rachel's heart clenched. And you did, he smiled faintly. Tried to, anyway. Truth is, I've been flying on fumes since. She didn't reply, just reached forward and gently touched his hand. Silence filled the hangar, but it wasn't heavy this time. It was shared. Ethan looked up at her, his gaze unreadable. What about you? Rachel blinked. What do you mean? You said you work in aviation. You're clearly not new to this world, but you don't talk about where you're from or what brought you here. She hesitated. Grew up around airports, she said slowly. Big ones. My father believed in steel and sky more than people. Built things to last. But he also taught me that flight isn't just about altitude. It's about trust. Letting go. Sounds like he taught you a lot. Rachel's eyes darkened for a moment. He taught me how to rise, but not how to land. Ethan studied her, as if trying to read the lines she hadn't yet spoken. I think you're still in the air, he said. She laughed, but there was a catch in it. I think you might be right. Later that day, as the sun stretched long fingers across the runway and the first chill of evening crept in, Rachel and Ethan stood by the simulator again, this time side by side. He handed her the old headset. Want to give it a shot? Rachel blinked. I haven't flown anything in years. Well, good news. This isn't anything, he grinned. It's a glorified video game with better scenery. She slid into the chair, adjusting the straps. Ethan leaned over her shoulder to toggle a few settings. She could feel the warmth of him, not just physically, but in the way he moved, careful not to overstep. I'll be your co-pilot, he said softly. The screens flickered to life. Rachel took the yoke with both hands, her fingers curling into remembered positions. As the virtual runway stretched before her, something clicked into place, like dust falling off a dream. Ready, she whispered. Then fly, Ethan said. She throttled forward, the simulator jerking with faux wind resistance. And within seconds, they were above the earth. Pixelated trees shrinking below, digital clouds drifting into view. Rachel laughed out loud. Ethan smiled. You still got it. They flew in circles for a few minutes, then leveled out. Rachel stared straight ahead, her voice barely audible. I used to do this with my dad, except he never let me take off solo. He sounds like a man who didn't want to let go. She turned to him slowly. He built an empire from nothing, but never trusted anyone else to hold the controls. Even me. Ethan nodded. And yet here you are. Yeah, she said, exhaling. Here I am. As night fell and they walked toward their cars, the cool breeze tugging at the hem of Rachel's jacket, Ethan looked over at her. You're different from the people I usually meet. Rachel smiled faintly. Good different. He looked at her for a long moment. The kind that makes you want to look up again. She stopped beside her car, turning toward him. Her heart beat fast, not from nerves, but from recognition. Recognition of a man who didn't ask what she owned, who didn't know her name, and yet somehow knew her. She almost told him right then. The truth about Dawson Air, about who she really was. But the moment was too fragile, too sacred. The words caught behind her teeth. Instead, she just said softly, Good night, Ethan. He nodded. See you tomorrow. As Rachel drove off into the dusky violet light, her fingers gripped the wheel tightly, her mind churning. She had always believed that trust had to be earned. But with Ethan, she was learning. Perhaps it had to be given first. The bonfire was Ethan's idea, though he'd never admit that out loud. Just a few scrap pallets, an old steel drum, and a couple of camping chairs borrowed from his neighbor's shed. Nothing fancy, But as the flames danced and cracked under the indigo sky, casting flickers of amber on Rachel's face, Ethan knew it was enough. Lucy had already fallen asleep in the truck after roasting 2 marshmallows and declaring herself Queen of the Skies. Her toy glider rested on the dashboard beside her, wings dusted with sugar. She hadn't stirred once since her eyelids gave in. Now it was just Ethan and Rachel, sitting by the fire outside the hangar. 2 people who didn't feel like strangers anymore, and yet didn't quite know what they were becoming. Rachel cradled a chipped enamel mug of cider, steam curling upward as her hair shimmered in the firelight. Her boots were kicked off, toes nudging gravel. "I haven't done this in years," she said softly. "What? Sit around a fire with a mechanic and a sleeping kid?" She smiled. "No, just slow down. Watch sparks instead of screens." Ethan poked at the logs with a length of rebar. "Not many sparks in the boardroom?" Rachel looked at him, and for the first time since they met, the playful glint faded. "I've been running for so long I forgot what stillness felt like," she said, "and I didn't realize how much I missed it." He didn't say anything at first, just watched the way the shadows moved across her face. "You know," he murmured, "for someone who's so good at hiding in plain sight, you've got a terrible poker face." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "You carry the weight of something," he continued, "but it's not guilt, it's distance. Like you're afraid to get too close because if someone saw the whole picture, they might not stay." Rachel turned toward the fire again, her lips parting but no words coming out. Ethan leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "But I'm still here." Their eyes locked. A beat passed, then another. Rachel didn't flinch this time. "I know," she whispered. "That's what scares me." The wind shifted, brushing hair across her cheek. Ethan reached up slowly, tucking it behind her ear, his hand lingering for just a second too long. Rachel's breath caught. It was one of those moments, rare, weightless, where everything becomes a question. Will he kiss her? Will she let him? The fire cracked. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. Rachel tilted her chin ever so slightly, her eyes not moving from his. Then Ethan's phone buzzed in his pocket. He sighed and pulled it out, scanning the screen. The spell broke. "Everything okay?" she asked, drawing back gently. He didn't answer at first. Then softly, "It's an email from Dawson Air's Regional Hiring Board." Rachel froze. "They rejected my application," he said. "Pilot position, part-time commuter line. Said I wasn't current enough. Not enough hours in the last 24 months. His voice was flat, but she heard what he didn't say. The gut punch, the blow to his pride, the closing of yet another door. "I'm so sorry," she offered. He nodded, jaw tight. "I shouldn't be surprised. Guys like me don't get second chances. Not unless we know someone." Rachel looked down at the cider cooling in her lap. "You do know someone," she said quietly. He gave her a strange look. "You?" She hesitated. This was the moment, the place to tell him everything. Who she really was, what she could do for him, how he wasn't just someone she'd randomly met on a plane. But instead she said, "I meant me, as in, I believe in you." That's got to count for something. His expression softened, but there was a shadow behind his smile. "I appreciate that." "I do," he said, "but sometimes believing isn't enough. Sometimes the world just moves on without you." Rachel swallowed hard. It wasn't the time. Not yet. So she offered the only truth she could safely give. "Then maybe you build a new runway." He looked at her, and something passed between them again. Not heat this time, but recognition. Of pain, of hope, of people learning to breathe again after too long underwater. He leaned back in his chair, looking up at the stars. "You ever wonder if we're all just waiting for the right wind to catch us?" "All the time," Rachel said. They sat like that, side by side, until the fire collapsed into a bed of coals, and the night folded in around them. Later, as Rachel drove back to her hotel, the rejection letter on Ethan's phone kept flashing through her mind like a warning light in the cockpit. She had the power to reverse that decision with one phone call. She could fix it, clear his record, put him in the pilot's seat tomorrow. But that wasn't what Ethan needed. What he needed, what he deserved, was someone who believed in him without needing to rescue him. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, the cool leather pressing into her palms. The truth had to come eventually. She knew that. But not tonight. Tonight she'd let him have his dignity, his firelight, his almost. The first thing Ethan noticed was the silence. It wasn't the absence of sound. The hangar still creaked and echoed like it always did. The wind still rattled the side panels. Lucy's humming still floated in and out of the office space as she colored beneath the bulletin board. No, it was a different kind of silence. The kind that follows absence. Rachel hadn't shown up. Not for the morning meeting they'd scheduled. Not for the coffee run she'd offered to make. Not for anything. At first, Ethan brushed it off. Maybe she overslept. Maybe her rental had a flat. Maybe she needed a day off. But by noon, he'd called her number twice, straight to voicemail. By evening, he'd sent a text. No reply. And by the time the sun slipped behind the pine trees that bordered the airport fence, Ethan was pacing the gravel outside the hangar, jaw tight, eyes scanning the road as if she might appear in the dust like some returning ghost. But she didn't. Inside the hangar, Lucy peeked up from her drawing. Is Miss Rachel coming back? Ethan knelt beside her, trying to keep his tone even. I don't know, sweetheart. Lucy's brow furrowed. Did she get on a plane? Maybe. Without saying goodbye? Ethan swallowed. Yeah, I guess so. Lucy nodded, the way kids do when they're trying to be braver than they feel. Okay. She went back to her drawing, but her crayon moved slower now. Ethan stood up, feeling something in his chest shift. A familiar tightness, the sensation of being left behind. It wasn't new. He'd felt it when Callie took her last breath. He'd felt it when the bank called about the hangar loan. He'd felt it again every time Lucy asked for something he couldn't give. But this was different. This time, it had come wrapped in warmth, in trust, in something that had started to feel like possibility, and it had vanished without a word. That night, Ethan sat alone at the workbench, the flying forward binder still open to the last module they'd reviewed together. Her notes were still there, neat, confident strokes in blue ink. His eyes drifted to the corner of the page, where she doodled a tiny plane with wings too large for its body, a child's version of freedom. He closed the binder and set it aside. The silence roared. 300 miles away, Rachel stood in the penthouse conference room of Dawson Air's headquarters. The city of Atlanta spread beneath her like a glittering map. Her heels clicked softly against the marble floor as she moved from window to table, arms crossed, heart pounding. Ma'am, her assistant said, clearing his throat. You've been gone 2 weeks. We need answers. The PR team is panicking. The expansion report's overdue. And the media is sniffing around that regional flight program. I know, Rachel interrupted. She wasn't angry, just tired. In the time she'd been gone, the company had continued spinning. Reports were filed, deals made, executives appeased. The machine ran fine without her, but she didn't. Every meeting, every update, every neatly itemized email felt hollow, like she was reading a script she didn't believe in anymore. The woman who'd returned to this boardroom was not the one who had left it, and she wasn't sure how to explain that. Her assistant stepped forward again, holding a white envelope. This came for you, he said. Hand-delivered, no return address. She took it and opened it carefully. Inside was a folded piece of paper, construction paper to be exact. On it was a drawing, a paper airplane, colored red and gold. Below it, in crayon, were the words, Please come back. We miss you. Lucy. Rachel sat down hard in the nearest chair. Her assistant stood there awkward. Should I give you a moment? She nodded. As the door closed behind him, Rachel laid the note flat on the table and stared at it. Lucy had found a way to reach her, even when Rachel hadn't deserved it. Back at the hangar, the following morning dawned in silver light. Ethan poured himself a mug of black coffee and sat by the open doors, watching the clouds roll over the tarmac. He didn't know what to think anymore. Was she just another visitor passing through? Someone with a good heart and a complicated life who'd left before it got messy? Or had he imagined it all? The connection, the quiet rhythm they'd begun to build. A beat-up postal truck pulled into the lot. The driver handed him a package with no return label. Inside was a small envelope, and beneath it, a flight badge. His name, pilot license number, clearance codes. He opened the envelope with shaking fingers. "I'm sorry I left without a word. You didn't deserve that, but you deserve this. A real shot, a real runway. I'll be watching your first flight." R. Ethan sat down slowly, the wind catching the edge of the badge, flipping it in his hand. He didn't smile. Not yet. But something inside him, something that had been waiting for years, finally exhaled. The hotel ballroom in Atlanta smelled faintly of polished wood, champagne, and power. Everything gleamed. The white marble floor, the crystal chandeliers, the floor-to-ceiling LED screen showing the Dawson Air logo spinning slowly behind a long, elevated stage. Industry professionals filled the rows of chairs, their name badges catching the light as they whispered and shifted in anticipation. It was the 40th Annual Aviation Advancement Summit, and Rachel Dawson was about to make her first public appearance in over a year. Ethan had no idea she would be there. He wasn't watching the broadcast for her. In fact, he hadn't even planned to tune in. But his friend Doug, a former pilot turned part-time radio host, texted him that morning with a cryptic message. "You're gonna want to see this. Trust me." So there he was, sitting in the break room at the hangar, a mug of reheated coffee in one hand and his tablet propped up against a can of WD-40. Lucy colored at the corner table beside him, humming softly to herself. On screen, the camera panned across the audience, then settled on the stage. The announcer's voice rang out. "And now, please welcome the CEO of Dawson Air and the visionary behind the Flying Forward Initiative, Ms. Rachel Dawson." Ethan nearly dropped the mug. There she was. Rachel, not in jeans and boots, not with wind-blown hair and grease on her fingertips, but in a tailored navy blazer, standing tall beneath the spotlight, her name echoing through the speakers like thunder. Lucy looked up. "Daddy, that's Miss Rachel." Ethan didn't respond. He couldn't. His eyes were locked on the screen, where Rachel stepped up to the podium, composed but clearly bracing herself. "Good morning," she began. "Before I begin, I'd like to acknowledge something important. For most of my life, I've worked behind the scenes, observing, directing, managing from a distance." She paused. "But a few weeks ago, I left the boardroom and stepped into a world I hadn't touched in years. A hangar in rural North Carolina, run by a man who had no idea who I was." Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't care about titles. He didn't ask what I owned or how many planes bore my name. He just saw someone in need and gave up his seat. She looked down for a moment, gathering herself. "His name is Ethan Blake," she continued. "A single father, a former military pilot, and one of the most quietly extraordinary people I've ever met." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the ballroom. Cameras panned to the audience, capturing confused expressions, half smiles, curious glances. Rachel lifted her chin. "He reminded me that kindness isn't a marketing slogan. It's a choice, a daily act of courage. And because of that one act, that one moment of undeserved compassion, I rediscovered why I love aviation, why I still believe in flight." Ethan could barely breathe. "I'm proud to announce that our first Flying Forward pilot training hub will be built at his hangar, with Ethan as the lead instructor and site director. And I hope," her voice faltered just for a second, "I hope he's watching." Lucy stared at her dad. "Are you okay?" Ethan stood up, walked to the door, then back again. He looked like someone pacing a runway, but unsure if he was cleared for takeoff. He didn't speak until the broadcast ended and the Dawson Air logo faded to black. Then he sat down heavily and whispered, "She lied to me." That night, the wind howled through the eaves of the hangar, cold and bitter. Ethan sat alone on the back steps, a blanket wrapped around his shoulders, the sky thick with clouds. He didn't know what he felt. Betrayal? Shock? Admiration? All he knew was that the woman who had shared marshmallows and laughter and stories of flight had also stood on a global stage and spoken his name to the world. He should have felt proud. Instead, he felt exposed. Because now it wasn't just a quiet connection between two souls under repair. Now it was a headline, a spectacle, a story. He thought about the envelope, the license, the badge. It hadn't been a token of faith. It had been a reward. And that changed everything. Or did it? He closed his eyes and tried to recall the look on her face that night by the fire. Not the CEO, not the heiress, just Rachel, the woman who'd let him believe he mattered. The woman who was probably waiting, somewhere out there, for him to decide whether she still did. The envelope arrived 3 days later. No courier, no email. Just a soft knock on the hangar door at dawn, and a man in a Dawson Air uniform standing in the mist, holding a small white envelope and a clipboard. Delivery for Mr. Ethan Blake. Ethan signed without a word. Lucy watched from the corner of the office, her cereal bowl forgotten, the milk going soggy. As the man disappeared into the fog, Ethan sat down at the workbench and stared at the envelope. It was embossed with a gold seal, clean, official, elegant in a way that made his calloused hands feel rougher than usual. He opened it slowly. Inside was a thick ivory card, printed in raised ink. You are cordially invited to attend the inaugural flight of the Flying Forward Initiative. Date, Saturday, 3 p.m. Location, Charlotte Regional Airstrip. Private hangar. 4. A seat has been reserved for you and your guest. No signature, no note. But he knew who had sent it. Rachel. Ethan didn't answer right away. He spent the morning working on a stubborn alternator, his knuckles cracking open as he forced bolts into place. Every turn of the wrench helped drown out the voices in his head. The ones that whispered she'd used him, lied to him, made him into a story. But another voice kept rising above the noise. Lucy's voice. She told me a story about a girl who flew a paper plane to the moon. I think my dad likes you. Please come back. That last one, written in crayon, still sat taped to the wall behind his desk. He stared at it as the afternoon sun shifted across the floor. By evening, he still hadn't decided. The next morning, he sat at the kitchen table while Lucy finished tying her shoes. She looked up. Are we going? He blinked. Going where? To see Miss Rachel fly. Ethan hesitated. You want to? Lucy didn't even pause. Of course, she sent us an invitation. That means she wants us there. He scratched his chin, stalling. It might be complicated. Did you do something bad? She asked, frowning. He looked at her, surprised. No. Sure, then what's so complicated? He laughed under his breath. You're getting too smart for me. Lucy shrugged. You said we don't leave people behind. Remember? Not when they're trying. That settled it. Saturday afternoon arrived with an open sky and the crisp bite of autumn in the air. Ethan wore his best flannel and a pair of clean jeans that still fit. Lucy insisted on her dress with the tiny airplanes embroidered along the hem, a gift from Rachel weeks earlier that she'd kept for special days. They drove in silence, Charlotte's skyline glinting in the distance. As they approached the private hangar, Ethan's stomach twisted with something between nerves and curiosity. The hangar wasn't large, but it was immaculate. Polished floors, white folding chairs arranged in neat rows. A small group of invited guests stood chatting near the refreshment table, most of them in suits or pilot uniforms. Ethan and Lucy stepped inside slowly, unsure where to go, until a woman in Dawson Air blue approached with a kind smile. Mr. Blake? Right this way. She's expecting you. Ethan's breath caught. She's expecting you. They were ushered to the front row, where 2 seats were labeled with simple place cards. Ethan Blake, Lucy Blake. On the stage was a sleek aircraft painted in silver and royal blue, the Flying Forward logo gleaming on its tail. Rachel hadn't appeared yet. Lucy sat up straighter, scanning the crowd with wide eyes. Do you think she's nervous? Ethan smiled, watching her. Probably. Just then, music swelled, a low, cinematic score, and the small crowd turned toward the platform at the far end of the hangar. Rachel walked in from the side, dressed in a pilot's jacket and dark jeans, her hair pulled back, no makeup. Just Rachel. She climbed the steps and stood in front of the plane, a wireless mic clipped to her collar. Thank you for coming, she began, her voice steady but warm. Today isn't just a launch, it's a landing for every dream that was put on hold, every pilot who thought their best days were behind them, every child who looked up and believed they belonged among the clouds. She paused, her gaze drifting briefly to the front row, to Ethan, to Lucy. I started this program because someone reminded me what flight really is. Not speed, Not altitude, but trust, generosity, the courage to lift someone else when they're grounded. Ethan felt Lucy reach for his hand. He squeezed it gently. Rachel continued. The first official flying forward flight takes off in 10 minutes, and I'd like to offer that honor to the man who unknowingly taught me how to fly again. She turned toward Ethan. Ethan Blake, would you join me in the cockpit? The entire room turned. Ethan rose slowly, his face unreadable. Lucy grinned. Go, Daddy. He walked toward her, heart pounding. Rachel met him at the bottom of the stairs. I didn't know how else to say it, she said, voice low. I needed you to see it, all of it. No hiding, no titles. Just this. Ethan studied her. And after we land? She held his gaze. That's your call. He nodded, then climbed the stairs beside her. The cockpit was smaller than Ethan remembered. Or maybe it just felt that way, because of the woman seated beside him. Rachel wore the pilot's headset like she'd been born into it. Yet her hands trembled slightly as she adjusted the throttle. He noticed but said nothing. Outside the windows, the sky stretched like an open canvas, high noon light pouring over the clouds like silk. Ethan sat in the co-pilot seat, strapping in slowly. His fingers found familiar buttons, gauges, levers. He didn't need to ask why she invited him up here. Some things you just knew. Fuel check complete, Rachel said quietly, keeping her eyes on the dash. Ready when you are. He responded without hesitation. Roger that. The engine roared to life, a deep purr rising into a smooth, powerful hum. The runway blurred into motion, and within seconds they were airborne, leaving the Earth and its questions behind. It wasn't until they reached cruising altitude that Rachel finally spoke again. I was terrified you wouldn't come. Ethan didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the horizon. I almost didn't. Silence settled between them, filled only by the steady beat of the instruments and the faint whoosh of wind beyond the glass. She removed her headset, turning slightly to face him. I never meant to lie, Ethan. But you did, he said. Yes, she admitted, her voice raw. I did. I kept my last name hidden. I let you believe I was just another passenger. And when I left without a word, it wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I cared too much. He turned toward her now, his face unreadable. You made me believe I'd found someone real. Not a story, not a headline. You did, she said fiercely. That was real, every second. Then why run? Because I've spent my whole life being judged by what I own, what I control. I needed to know. If you looked at me and saw a person, not a brand. Ethan took a long breath. I saw someone kind, smart, brave, someone who listened to my daughter like she mattered, someone who sat in silence and made it feel full instead of empty. His voice lowered. But you walked away, Rachel, without trusting me with the truth. Rachel's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. You're right. I failed the very test I set for you. She reached slowly into her jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, wrinkled, handled too many times. She handed it to him. It was Lucy's drawing, the red and gold paper airplane. She gave me this the day I left, Rachel whispered. I carried it through boardrooms, conference calls, coast-to-coast flights. And every time I looked at it, I remembered the hangar, the smell of engine grease, the sound of your laugh, the firelight. Ethan's jaw clenched. Then why come back now? She met his eyes squarely. Because I realized I couldn't land without you. The plane cruised on, cutting through high-altitude winds like a truth long overdue. Ethan looked down at the drawing again, fingers tracing the curve of Lucy's scrawl. For a moment, his guard slipped, just enough for her to see the man underneath. She misses you, he said. Rachel smiled softly. I miss her too. Another beat passed. And what about me? He asked, not sharply, but with the quiet ache of someone who's been left behind one too many times. Rachel inhaled, steady and sure. You're the only person who ever made me feel like I could be seen without being showcased. You reminded me that leadership isn't about control. It's about connection. I want that. I want you. Ethan leaned back, exhaling through his nose. Is this the part where you offer me a corner office and a bonus package? She laughed, startled. No, This is the part where I say, I don't want to fly without you anymore. The cockpit filled with stillness. Then Ethan, almost smiling, asked, You know what I remember most about that flight to Charlotte? Rachel shook her head. You look like someone who was falling from the inside. And I didn't stand up for you because I thought you were rich or important. I stood up because you looked alone. I know what that feels like. She nodded slowly. I don't want to feel that way again. You don't have to. He reached out, took her hand. Firm, solid, real. Rachel didn't say anything. She didn't have to. The flight controller's voice broke over the comms. Flying forward 1, you are cleared for return descent. Ethan looked at her. Ready to land? Rachel smiled. Only if you're still beside me. They eased the plane into its slow arc downward, dipping beneath the clouds together, the blue thinning to soft gold as the afternoon sun began to set. And somewhere between sky and earth, hurt and healing, what began as a gesture in an airplane aisle found its way to something deeper. Not a perfect ending, but a beginning, with both of them in the cockpit. The first time Rachel Dawson came to North Carolina, she arrived quietly, unannounced, unrecognizable, and uncertain of her place in the world. The second time, she returned as herself. No disguises, no omissions. Just Rachel, founder, pilot, daughter, and now woman with her heart finally out in the open. Ethan waited for her at the edge of the gravel lot, the autumn wind tugging lightly at his jacket. The sky above the hangar was streaked with the fading gold of late afternoon, and the parking area overflowed with cars. Journalists, local residents, veterans in pressed uniforms, even teenagers holding cardboard signs that read, Flying forward begins here. Lucy clung to his hand, her dress flaring as she spun in nervous excitement. Do you think she'll remember the surprise? She asked, eyes bright. Ethan grinned. She helped plan it, remember? I know, but still, it's a big day. It was, bigger than either of them had imagined. Inside the hangar, everything had been transformed. Gone were the broken parts and boxes of forgotten tools. In their place stood gleaming flight panels, restored gauges, and a wall-length banner that read, Welcome to the Ethan Blake Flight Training Center, home of flying forward. Rachel entered through the side door, wearing a simple navy jacket and a pair of aviators perched in her hair. When she saw the sign, she paused. Not because she hadn't known, but because seeing it in reality made her breath catch. Ethan noticed. Too much? He asked, stepping forward. She shook her head, the emotion barely held in check. It's perfect. Across the hangar, people applauded as she approached the podium. A modest one, borrowed from the town library. Flashbulbs flickered, but Rachel didn't flinch this time. She cleared her throat, then spoke into the mic, her voice strong and steady. Thank you all for coming today. I never imagined that a regional pilot initiative would gather this much attention. Then again, I never imagined I'd find someone like Ethan Blake, or his daughter Lucy, who wrote me a note in crayon that changed everything. A wave of laughter swept through the room. Rachel smiled. This program was born from the belief that flight belongs to more than the privileged few. That experience, integrity, and resilience should count more than clean resumes or spotless uniforms. She turned to Ethan. Ethan didn't just give me a seat. He gave me a reminder of who I wanted to be. And now, this hangar, his hangar, will be the place where other pilots find their second chances. Applause thundered again, louder this time, heartfelt. Rachel stepped back as Ethan took the stage next. His hands were steady, his voice low but sure. I've been a lot of things in my life. A soldier, a husband, a mechanic, a father. But I never thought I'd be the kind of man who stood behind a podium with his name on the wall. He looked at Lucy, then Rachel. But life has a way of surprising you, especially when someone believes in you more than you believe in yourself. He held up the new pilot badge she'd given him weeks ago. This isn't a gift, he said. It's a responsibility, and I intend to earn it. The crowd rose to their feet, and for once Ethan didn't shrink from the spotlight. After the speeches, the celebration flowed into the evening, with food trucks parked outside, local musicians setting up by the runway, and laughter drifting through the air like music of its own. Rachel and Ethan slipped away to the back of the hangar, where the light was quieter and the noise softened by distance. They stood together beneath the new banner, watching as Lucy led a group of kids on a pretend training flight, using old cardboard boxes and a lot of imagination. She's going to run this place someday, Ethan said. Rachel smiled. I hope she invites us back when she does. He glanced at her. You really mean to stay? Rachel turned to face him fully. I've lived in penthouses, boardrooms, in first-class lounges. None of them ever felt like home until I stood in this hangar with you. He looked down, then back up. What about Dawson Air? I'll still run it, but differently, and from here, part-time at least. I've got a second in command who's been waiting for me to get out of her way anyway. Ethan stepped closer. You sure you're not doing all this just because I gave you a seat? She smiled. No, I'm doing this because you reminded me that the best flights don't start with a destination. They start with a reason. He reached for her hand, fingers interlacing with hers. The music drifted from outside, faint but beautiful. Rachel leaned in, resting her head against his shoulder. This feels like landing, she said. Ethan nodded. Yeah, but it's also the beginning of something better. A year later, the hangar didn't just look different, it felt different. Gone was the quiet, hollow echo of a place forgotten. In its place pulsed the steady rhythm of revival, engines humming, flight manuals being studied, laughter echoing across concrete floors. The scent of oil mingled with fresh brewed coffee and hope. The Ethan Blake Flight Training Center had trained 18 pilots since opening. 12 of them were veterans. 3 were single parents. 1 had nearly given up flying for good, and not a single one had left unchained. Outside on the edge of the airstrip, Ethan stood with Lucy beside him, both watching the horizon as a pair of trainee planes completed their landing drills. Lucy, now 8 and growing faster than his heart could follow, wore her own mini flight jacket, a gift from Rachel on her last birthday. Do you think I'll fly solo next year? She asked, bouncing on her toes. Ethan smiled. You'll probably be teaching the class. She giggled, then pointed toward the distant silver glint of a plane approaching from the north. Is that her? Ethan shielded his eyes. He didn't need to check the tail number. Yes, he said quietly. That's her. Rachel touched down with practiced ease, the aircraft dipping gracefully before settling onto the runway like it belonged there, which after everything, it did. She taxied toward the hangar, popped the canopy, and pulled off her headset. Her hair was longer now, a little wilder. She didn't wear makeup or heels or the armor she used to need to feel powerful. These days, she didn't need to prove anything. She had already become the person she once only pretended to be. Ethan helped her down from the plane, his hands firm around her waist. You're late, he said, smirking. She kissed him lightly on the cheek. I brought donuts. Lucy came running, arms wide, throwing herself into Rachel's embrace with a squeal. Next time I fly with you, Lucy declared. Rachel ruffled her hair. Deal, but only if you promise not to fall asleep mid-flight again. I was just resting my brain, Lucy replied primly, then skipped off toward the picnic tables where a small crowd had gathered. Today was an open house, a chance for the town to see what the program had become, what it was becoming still. Local news had set up cameras. Old veterans leaned on canes, eyes wet as they watched young men and women they'd mentored take flight again. This time not for war, but for something better. Rachel and Ethan walked side by side along the runway's edge, the sun casting long, soft shadows before them. I got another offer from Boston, Rachel said. Private jet company, big salary, unlimited budget. Ethan glanced at her. Tempted. She shook her head. Not even a little. They stopped at the edge of the tarmac where a bench overlooked the valley below, golden hills stretching beyond the trees like something from a painting. Do you ever miss it? He asked. The boardroom, the spotlight. Rachel considered the question for a long time. I used to think I had to chase things to matter, she said. Now I know. Some of the most extraordinary lives happen in the smallest places. I've never felt smaller or more seen than I do right here. He took her hand, fingers lacing gently into hers. Then stay seen. She leaned her head on his shoulder. I plan to. As the afternoon wore on, music played from a scratchy speaker. Children built paper planes. Trainees gave families short joyrides above the town. And just before sunset, Rachel stood on the hangar steps and invited the crowd to gather. I don't have a speech, she said with a smile. Just a thank you to every person who took a chance on this place and on the people who dreamed of flying again. Then she stepped aside and gestured to Lucy, who stood shyly with a small plaque in her hands. Ethan helped her to the front, and together they unveiled a new addition to the wall near the hangar entrance. A metal plate engraved with two names, Rachel Dawson and Ethan Blake, above the clouds. Founded here beneath it, a line Lucy had written in her own crooked handwriting, cast in brass. Some flights aren't just in the sky, they're in the heart. A hush fell over the crowd. Rachel squeezed Ethan's hand, her eyes damp. Later, after the last car had driven off and the lights dimmed low, Rachel and Ethan sat beneath the stars with Lucy asleep between them on a blanket. She's growing up fast, Rachel murmured. Ethan nodded. So are we. They lay back in the grass, shoulder to shoulder, staring at the quiet canopy above. You ever wonder what would have happened if you hadn't stood up for me that day on the plane? She asked. Ethan smiled. You would have figured it out on your own. She turned to look at him. No, I would have flown, but I wouldn't have known where to land. He kissed her gently. Not a beginning, not an end. Just a quiet, steady continuation. The stars blinked on above them like a runway in the dark. And somewhere beyond the clouds, tomorrow waited. Not perfect, not predictable, but full of flight. If you made it to the end of this story, thank you. I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below and let me know what part of the world you're in, or what part of the story touched you most. And if this story moved you, inspired you, or simply gave you a moment of peace today, I hope you'll consider subscribing to the channel. There are so many more heartwarming stories coming your way. Stories about hope, love, and the quiet power of kindness. Until next time, thank you so much for being here. Stay safe, stay kind, and keep believing in the good things just above the clouds.